So, hello, welcome to episode 131 of this series where I am programming a game for the original NES live on Twitch. Welcome back. It has been a long time, or it seems that way. Who knew in October of last year all the things that would happen between then and now? Feels like ages ago, but it's been about a year since the last stream, and so you know, in the interim, as I mentioned in the channel update, not too much has gone on with the game. I've been kind of taking care of things that need to be done in my personal life, and so things have been a little bit on hold. But the good news is that I am back. We are ready for working on this game. We're going to try and be a little more focused and try and get some of this gameplay stuff working and in order here, because that is where we kind of are right now. There's still some technical things, obviously, that need to be taken care of, but by and large, those are things we can deal with without too much issue. The bigger challenges are, like, how do we turn what we've built here into something that is a game that's enjoyable to play. I mean, that is the age-old question, I guess, of game design. But more concretely, how do we take all of this stuff that we have here and start building some layers to it to make this shooter into a fun, or at least presumably entertaining game that we can then build a story around and you know, build some levels and that kind of stuff. When it comes to that kind of thing, you know, that's the difficult part for me. I can code pretty much whatever I need to, but turning this into something that's actually fun to play is what's going to be challenging here. Now, one thing, let's do a quick recap. There was a stream that happened, I don't even know when it was. I'm not talking about, I had done some streams where I was playing Secret of Mana. That was more obviously just for fun. I think there was one stream in there also where I played some Star Tropics. Again, that was not research or anything like that. That was just fun, you know, trying to do some streaming and, if nothing else, prove that I was still alive, other than my tweets. Oh, what happened? I went to coding and all my stuff disappeared. So there's the intro. Is the chat window still there? It isn't. What happened to my programming window? OBS, what are you doing to me? It's like those graphics disappeared. Oh, I see what happened. Okay. That makes more sense with what I was thinking it should have looked like anyway. But okay. Sorry to keep switching around the views. It's been a while since I've played with my Stream Deck. So what happened in between was I did do some work where I reworked the way that the sprites and the entities that use the sprites were associated, because what I was realizing was that it was not my best move to be taking the literal sprite and using that as an association to the entity in the game. So, for example, we have, you know, a bullet that the player fires, and that bullet was then directly mapped to a sprite graphic that was then drawn on screen. But the problem was that we had some cases where we needed to do we needed to provide entities that didn't have a direct correlation to one specific sprite. So, for example, you can look at this here, where if you have, for example, the player ship, right? And if I go to, let's go to the graphics here. And this is recap for anybody who was watching that stream, but there weren't too many people on that, so it's worth recapping here. All right, so if you look here, I've got these 3 images. I can just drop them into a sprite. Sorry, I got cut off there. So, you want to zoom in here? All right, so we have our neutral. We have tilt right and tilt left, right? How do you zoom out? Oh, right click. Okay. So the problem was, if the entity is the player ship entity and it's directly associated to a single sprite, how do we use something like the neutral sprite and the right sprite and the left sprite? We don't want to have 3 different entities that represent the player, because that's just dumb. There's no there's no reason to do something like that. Instead, we would have one entity that represents the player, and then as you turn right, it shifts to the right sprite, and if you turn left, it shifts to the left sprite. And of course, the challenge with that was, when you have the 1-to-1, you can't do that. So what we had to do was we had to change it so that the entities and the sprites are 2 distinct things. So if we go to well, we can stay on here. You can see that in draw entities, it's looking at these sprite types. I don't know if Visual Studio Code will not know what to do with those, but there is a file. It doesn't know how to open that either. Sprite types. So in the sprite types, this is generated by the asset tool. It generates, these are the different sprites that can be drawn. The game engine will tie together the entities, the actual game entities, which I believe is just still... Is that still used? Maybe not. Game entities, right. We'll tie together these game entities with the actual sprite types. So, for example, when you're working with the player, depending on which way the controller is pressing, it will change the sprite to be either neutral, left, or right. Right? Makes sense? Because that's the easiest way to kind of pull that all together. Now, the other thing you can do, if you wanted to, is in a higher level language, if you wanted to do something where you wanted to ensure that you always had a simple way of mapping the direction to a particular sprite, you could have an array or something that you use to look up these numeric mappings, but I don't think we need to do anything like that. For things like the explosion entity, there is also a sprite type called explode, and that is a complex sprite where it understands how to process the animation of the explosion, which in the asset tool is handled by marking it as animated, and then it generates the different frames that it toggles through, or cycles through rather. Now there's no timing associated to that, I think, as far as the frame timing goes. So like if you had a complex animation where the different frames have to last the different number of cycles, that's not possible right now. We might have to do that at some point there, but that is not in the cards at the moment. So what am I looking for? I am looking for two things. Let's get rid of the NES ROM. Let's set up the command. Let's make a new ROM to make sure we're at the latest. Let's go into the assets. Let's just really quick. I wanted to show. Wanted to look at this. Well, did it explode? What is it? It does explode.sprite, but it doesn't seem to be loading. Now, if I remember right from the last time, there was a problem where the sprites were not mapped or not working correctly because we changed the format. So, let me see something here. Oh, it might be because I was looking at the wrong one. So, yeah. So you can see here in the asset tool, it's set that it's animated, and if I uncheck it, you can see these are all the frames, but it just knows how to condense that back down. So that's all good. Let's go back to the ROM for a second. Actually, we'll stay in this, and we will launch this and take a look at where we are. Sorry, I'm bumping the microphone. I'm going to have to remap this because I don't have the gamepad here with me right now. Just get any old mapping working. Alright, so we have that working. The colors are wrong, but that's okay. I don't believe the enemies are working because I believe that the map only knows about... It's still doing the one-to-one mapping versus mapping things like we switched to with the ship. So, oh yeah, see, it's stuck up there. Obviously it doesn't do anything, and it's using the wrong sprite. It's got the wrong entity type, so it doesn't even know what to do to process the logic of the enemy up there, and the collisions are similarly impaired. So we have a few things we can do. We can... I just wanted to set the scaling so that it's integer scale and doesn't have that weird shimmer effect. So we can do a few things. We can work on making the player ship actually do that pivot as we move left and right. That might be a fun thing to get started with, just to kind of warm up our 6502 chops again. And then take on the map, or we could take on the map and fix the enemy placement. I think I want to do the ship just because that's kind of a little more gratifying to see that play out, since that was the thing that sparked what we're doing here. So let's do that. So we'll pause that. I think this is going to be relatively easy to change because we've kind of set everything up for success. We have... the entity has now this new sprite byte that tells us what sprite to render. There's the entity player. We're initializing it with player neutral. So here's the process object loop. So if the entity player is player, then it goes to process. The player And it does that in this file. Process player. It's not going to do anything related to the inputs here because that's handled separately. Well, you know what though? The inputs change the velocities and stuff like that, so maybe this is the right place to change the sprite, because as we change our X and Y velocity, depending on which direction we're moving, we want to change the sprite that's being used. I think that's good. I think that's what we want to do. So let's see. Where are we actually doing? Let's collision with the map. Alright, so that was the collision loop, so it's going to be earlier on here. Calculate screen position of the player. Skip the velocity. Skip Y velocity. So load the X velocity. If it's equal, which means it's 0, then we're done. If it's positive. Alright, so if the X velocity is positive, that means we're moving to the right. Set carry and do subtract. Skip. So that's where we're doing that. This is where we're doing our crazy greater than less than comparison that we worked on so long ago for negative comparisons. Let's see, if it's positive, then decrement the velocity. Do a negative comparison via subtract. And then we store it. Reload X velocity, skip negative case, set the carry, and then shift, divide by 2. So we're doing our shift to divide that value down so that we can properly do an add of a negative, essentially. So we add that. So if we're adding negative, then we're going left, which means that we should change, after we do the add carry and store it, we should load A with sprite type. That's what it is, right? Player tilt left. Store that into objects entity. I believe it's just sprite, right? Okay. Excuse me. So now, then we increment the velocity because it was negative, and this is now a positive case. So after the part where we do, oh, this is Y velocity, which I don't care about. This is the positive case, so we are just shifting normally and adding it and storing it, and then what we want to do. Did I mess up the code here? I did, because it needs that comparison. Hey, Eugene. It goes okay. How are you? I'm attempting to take advantage of some of the new logic that I put into this crazy code here. So trying to make this work. Let's load and store using Y, because I don't think we're using Y as our register here, and I don't want to have to push A if we don't need to. I don't see the Y register being used, so I think we're good here. So that's that. And then same thing here, where before we do our comparison with A, we're going to load and store Y, except now we're going to be tilting to the right. So let's see if that worked, or if it did something crazy, or what. I'm happy to see a continue option on that title screen. Yeah, I'm without getting too much into it, I think the game is, I mean, the game is going to be a shooter, and it's going to be tough, but I think it's not going to be tough in terms of, like, being unfair tough. I mean, I think there are going to certainly be areas where you need to, like any shooter, if you're skillful enough, you can make it through without dying, but then you also will be able to do even better by memorizing what comes next. But there's going to be some cool things that I have kind of planned. I don't want to necessarily give them away right now. Not that it's a huge secret or spoiler or anything, but just I'm not ready to talk about that quite yet. Just because it's going to be interesting. So let's, oh, okay, so look at that. So it is changing, but it's not changing back to neutral. So we did the thing that I usually do when I'm implementing this, which is I got half of the cases implemented properly, and then of course forgot about the case where nothing happens. So we could pretty easily fix this. We can pretty easily fix this by just setting it to be neutral every time. What did that say? Player neutral. And by doing that, then it'll only be changed if we actually need to change it, because you're heading in one direction or another. Although I wonder if, well, that shouldn't matter. Keep bumping the microphone. Eugene, how's the audio? Is it good? I was adjusting it from when I recorded the channel update. It was a little crackly there. Player neutral. I guess it's because if the velocity isn't 0, it must be still, or even if it is 0, is it adding 0 to it? Audio is great. Okay, cool. Thank you. Skip Y velocity. Branch. Okay, if the branch of equal to process player XV done. Process player XV done is this. Load A, Y velocity, and then do that. So why on earth is this doing what it's doing? Just checking to see if the player is alive, and if it isn't, it's skipping it. Otherwise, it's incrementing the object timer in case there's anything that needs to happen. It should just work fine here. I'm loading player neutral, storing it into sprite, just like I'm doing with the other ones. So, I mean, I guess we can move this. It kind of doesn't make sense to do this if the player isn't alive anymore. So we can do this over here. But barring that, I'm obviously not expecting it to change now that I did that, because it shouldn't have changed anything. Okay, so what about this is making the player's velocity not 0? Alright, so the entities are at what location? Objects are at 500 in RAM. So entity 0 is the sprite for the player, or the player, and it's not the sprite anymore, right? So we have our X positions, 1 byte. We have our Y position. We have our Y world position, which is 2 bytes. We have an X velocity and a Y velocity. A type, which is player entity 3, right? Yep, that's correct. So that's the player. We have our data word, so that's 2 bytes. We have a timer, which is 6, which we don't care about. And the sprite is 4. So we process the player. It comes in, it loads the neutral sprite. Let's take a look at what that actually looks like here. So player, there's our breakpoint, and we run, we hit the breakpoint, we load the data, compare it to alive, the player is alive, we load A with player neutral. Oh, why is A still 0? It should be. Did it not pick up that code change in Messin? Let me see. That would make a little more sense. There we go. And there's even a little bit of a delay as the velocity evens out before it returns to neutral. Cool. Well, like I said, that's kind of what this is kind of what started all of this. So we accomplished this while breaking a bunch of other things, but that's okay. That's exciting. So one of the other things, I don't know if I mentioned this or not on any of the streams such a long time ago, but the sprite is really cool, and I really like it, and it looks great on a modern display capable of rendering crisp pixels. But on a CRT, it is just too detailed, so it unfortunately looks a little bit blurry and not so great. Even though I love the way the sprite looks, so that's something that needs to be revised at some point. But that's cool. The other thing is the background water is similarly problematic because of the same issue. CRTs, I mean, how many people are going to be playing this game on a CRT? I don't know. Maybe a handful, if that, but I think there's something to be said about the aesthetic that you have to kind of try to adhere to when making an NES game, where they knew that it was going to be on a CRT that was kind of a blurry mess. And so as a result, there's a certain limit to what the artists did in terms of, you know, trying to have art done in a certain way. Like they knew that, you know, as cool as a sprite like this will look, it's not going to render, especially like you have those individual pixels, right? Like those are discrete colors, those individual pixels, and as good as that looks, it's just not gonna work on a CRT. So I mean, the artist Jordan is aware of that, and he's been very gracious and patient with the fact that I've been on hiatus for so long, and still looking to continue work on this. So all right, cool. That went a little bit that went fast. I didn't know what to expect, but glad to see that that's, I mean, it was a simple change, obviously, so it should have gone fast, but you never know. No, different Jordan, not the one that you're thinking of. Yeah, and I know what you're referring to. Unfortunately, that was a surprise to everybody, I think. But no, this is a Jordan who is from New Zealand, who I met by way of an artist that I follow. I had asked her if she was interested in doing the art for the game, and she referred me to Jordan. So, all right. So the next thing we need to fix then is the enemies that are supposed to appear on the map. And like I said, the problem with them is that the sprite and the entity is not split up like it is with the other things. So the question becomes, do we need it to be for the enemies on the map? I mean, for the sake of consistency, we probably should. I thought I had put something in. Sorry, I'm just kind of clicking around. It's like a nervous habit as I'm thinking about this. Let's see. It's funny that I actually remember some of these routine names after this long. So when we add the map object, we are add map object. So it's going to loop through the objects in the list of objects and see if there are any free to be able to add the new object. Okay, and so then it's doing what I thought it was doing, which is it's adding the type and the corresponding sprite. Oh, but you know what? It's because they don't match. So if we go to game entities here, we have little bit is 8 there, little bit is 6 here. And that doesn't work because they have to be the same if we wanted it to work just by kind of masking over the two things. So let's see, and launch is 9. This is not permanent code, what I'm doing here. What I want to just prove out is that if I make these match, then things will be good. And then we can go about separating this like we should. Eugene, I'm sure you saw, not game related, but still pretty exciting, new Animaniacs episodes. I had heard the rumors that they were working on it, but it was still really nice to see a trailer for it. And if anybody hasn't heard about this or watched the trailers, I don't know what you've been doing on the internet this whole time. I played... Oh, here we go. We've got some enemies. They're not... It's not working the way it's supposed to, but they're there. I showed the trailer to my daughter, and she was so excited. I mean, I was excited too. I love that show. Oh, let me scale to a scale that actually fits in the window. Oh, it's Alt. I thought it was Control. There. That's good. Yeah, I was not overwhelmed by the trailer, but I was looking forward to it, especially because I didn't realize we would also get more Pinky in the Brain. Yeah, I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of content there. It was just kind of goofy and fun. I was glad to see it more than anything else. I think that was kind of the consensus of everybody. But still super cool. All right. Let's see these enemies show up, and oh, they're so the explosions are probably not going to work either. Okay, yeah, so that makes sense that the explosion doesn't work either, because that's also not, well, that's one on both, but my guess is that who couldn't use more chicken boo, Eugene? I agree. Now I'm hearing that song stuck in my head. That theme song is very catchy, even as short as it is. Let's see. This is not what I wanted. I wanted playerism, and then I wanted to look for the explode. Here it is. So once again, this is not the right way to do this, but this is just kind of to get things working again. Shoot, speaking of explosions, I played a lot more Scrambled recently. I know sometimes the explosions of the enemies stay on the screen. They stay like on the edges of the screen, on the extreme left or right. I know it's a little thing, but I'm loving that the ship tilts. That makes it feel so much more polished. Like, those are the kinds of things that actually make the game feel like somebody knew what they were doing. They stay wherever the enemy died. That's based on an old Atari game, isn't it? Explosions are still not working. Old Konami arcade game. Yeah, I don't know. I've never really played Scramble, so I don't know if that's a quirk with the port that Kevin did, or if that's actually how it was in the arcade. It's possible that's actually how it was. I avoided the explosions for a while because I thought they would kill me. Yeah, no, that I couldn't understand that. It makes me think of if you've ever played, it's a game called Every Extend Extra. It's, I believe, by the same guy, the same team that created Luminous, or Lumines, however you pronounce that. I think it's Luminous. Where when you shoot things... Wait, am I thinking of the right... Yes, so Everyday Shooter has some of this too, but when you shoot enemies on the screen and they explode, those explosions can also kill neighboring bad guys, right? I'm thinking Every Extend Extra. I was totally addicted to Luminous, and when I heard this team made another game, I had to get it. I think that's right. I think that yeah, so I believe the explosions in this game also impact the enemies around, but I know for a fact that's a big part of everyday shooter. Like, all you need is kill. Yeah. Yeah, somehow it's like, it feels like it's wrong or grammatically wrong, but it still works. So you can see here in the art, there are these big explosions, and as the big explosions kind of propagate out, they kill the bad guys as well, and that gives you extra combos, and you can collect the little bits of stuff that gives you extra life or points or something. It's been a while since I played that game. That was a fun game, and the music for that game is very, very interesting and pretty unique, because it's all like electric guitar based, and it sort of organically builds as you do things with little riffs and sounds from the guitar and stuff like that. It's really cool. I like that game a lot. Was that Jonathan Mack from Queasy Games, I believe? Alright, so explosion. What is your deal? So it says if the entity type is explosion, let's go process an explosion, which is explode that asm. Process explode. Sprite types, draw sprites. Branch not equal, draw explode sprite. It looks like it should be doing what it's supposed to, but it looks like when it hits the, looks like when the player hits the enemy with a bullet. And you know what? Well, when the player hits the enemy with a bullet, that is, check bullet collision. So that's a different thing. That is not happening correctly here. So that's that. I should just look for all references to explode, because like I said, even though this is technically not proper, we want to get things into sort of semi-working state first, and then we'll worry about it being done the correct way. This is a waste of a load. That's comparing, that's okay, that's for the draw. This is no longer used because we don't draw entities, we draw sprites. Okay. So one thing I'm going to try and do with these streams also is I'm going to try and limit them to a certain amount of time and try to focus on tasks that I will prepare ahead of time, so that I can be a little bit more productive. Because as much as it sounds like people like to just sit and listen to me talk about this stuff, there is the goal of actually finishing this game and putting it on cartridge and stuff like that. I was actually recently talking with someone. There we go. That's what I like to see. I was recently talking with someone who, he's an electrical engineer and plays some video games. Yes, I will talk about that in a moment. I was talking with someone who's an electrical engineer, and he's in the process of building some of his own boards. He's putting together a video of how to flash your own boards, not using INL boards or GT-ROM, but rather just using the Masamura PCBs and EEPROM. Oh, wrong buttons! Oh no, I have the wrong buttons. And programmable EEPROM chips, which is kind of cool. There's something really neat about the idea of doing that yourself with these boards. I mean, the thing is, then you've got to solder all of those boards and the EEPROMs onto those boards, and if you mess it up, it's a little bit little bit of a pain. Your quality control has to be a little bit higher because it's not like with the INL boards where, oh god, I'm trying to talk and, oh, that's interesting. All right, well, we've still got some problems here. Let's see if I can reproduce that. It's not like the INL boards where if you mess them up, you just flash them again. It's a little bit more tricky than that. I've seen John Riggs talk about the Mossmore boards, and they look pretty good. Yeah, I mean, they have different configurations for different types of games with different types of mappers. So they definitely are. They work. Looks like I'm suffering from scrambulitis here. Why are they... So there are a couple of things going on here. Let's take a look. So it's cycling through these sprites. It's not destroying the explosion sprites properly. And it's still cycling through the enemy sprites here, which is a little weird. I guess it's not clearing them out. Let me slow this down for a second. I mean, the fact that the player sprite is moving around is okay, because that's... I believe that is being done on purpose as part of the flickering code that I wrote a while back to ensure that the sprite is never in the same position in the hardware every time. So that if you have too many sprites on the scan line, you're guaranteed to... What was happening was if you have sprite 0, like if you have the player, which is entity 0 all the time, on sprite 0 through 3. Pause, will you? Is it still doing that while the game is paused? Okay, there we go. Then what happens is if you have a bunch of stuff on the line, anything that appears kind of at the end of the entity list will always be invisible because it just draws it in order, and as a result, you run out of sprites per line. So it's cycling the sprites through here, but what was weird was that still seemed to... It still seems to be drawing the... It was drawing the... Well, see, it's not doing that now, so something else is wrong. There might be something wrong with the math because we added that extra byte for the sprite. For the sprite itself, the sprite byte, the identifier. So yeah, anyway, those Mossmore boards seem pretty decent. I died. All right, so something is wrong about the way that's happening. It's getting closer. He actually took that Hello Mario program, not that that's anything particularly great, for Zero Pages episode 5, or sorry, 4, and he flashed that onto some EEPROMs and popped it into an NES, and it worked. After I had to make one change, which was I had to deliberately clear out the background name tables. So it looks like what's happening is once the explosion is getting to the point where it hits the player, then it gets stuck on screen, and then we have that weird problem. I've been working on... I'm in the process of updating some of the less expensive games to complete in box, because it gives me an excuse to get rid of games if I don't care enough to have it complete in box, like Super Castlevania. Then it's like, do I really need to have this? And the answer is no, I don't. With the exception of some of the games that I have that I got that are... They were relatively expensive at the time I got them, and now they're just insane. So, like, you know, Earthbound was always expensive, but now it's like $300 for just the loose cart. Forget about complete in box. That's like, I think that's like $1,000 now. So at that point, it's like, I kind of still want the cartridge. I just don't want to spend the money on buying a box. I didn't prove out what I wanted to because I was talking about collecting. If you're into collecting, I've been listening to the Collector Quest podcast. Kind of an interesting podcast. Yep, that's exactly what's happening. So as it hits the player, the explosion gets stuck. Yeah, you know, I think people just want what they want. So the fact that you can play it now on the SNES Classic, which is still, I think, considered relatively hard to find, even though it was much easier than the NES Classic. It's just one of those things where, you know, people want the hardware. Which I get. I mean, I like the cartridges. I like having that feel. I know you do too. But all right, so we're gonna have to figure out why things go bananas after that. Yeah, so Collector's Quest is. I haven't listened to all the episodes. I've listened to some of the more recent, like the last couple of years worth of episodes. I'm pretty sure. And they talk a lot about collecting sets. The guy who runs Art of NP Twitter, Stefan Reese, he is one of the hosts of the podcast, and they talk about having complete Super Nintendo sets, complete NES sets, complete Wii sets, all this other stuff, complete Xbox. It's interesting. It's a good podcast. Until very recently, Nintendo had refurbished NES and SNES classics in their store. Yeah, and I know some YouTubers were talking about that, again, up until pretty recently. And probably caused them to get moved out quickly. But, you know, I mean, as long as people were buying them because they wanted them and not to scalp them, it's like, that's fine. It was cool that Nintendo was even selling them. Yeah, I did see that he was on Retronauts. I want to go. I wanted to get in their Patreon to be able to listen to some of those episodes on Retronauts, but I'm little trying to be a little bit better with where I'm spending my money, just because we've been doing a lot of stuff around the house recently, and as I think a lot of people have when they can't go on vacation, because they can't go on vacation or shouldn't be going on vacation, they're doing stuff around the house. So we've done a lot of stuff to kind of improve the house, and went a little overboard. So I'm trying to be a little bit smarter about what I'm doing with my game collecting stuff, and I've been kind of getting rid of things that I like. It's clear I don't need them. Alright, so let's see what's going on here with, we're actually in a reasonably good position right now with the way things are working. It's not processing the explosion properly. It seems like it's getting to the point where the explosion collides with the player, and And then, yeah. Yeah, it's different. The couch that's over in the side there, it's not even a couch, it's a chair and a half, used to be running kind of perpendicular to me instead of being set parallel, and there's a air conditioning unit there now too. On the wall that I'm looking at to the right of me, there was a closet that used to have the oil tank. It hasn't had an oil tank in there for, I guess we've been in this house for about 10 years. No, 9 years. So when we moved in, we got rid of the oil burner because it was like 30 years old and could get rid of the oil tank as a result of that. So we just had this big closet that I kind of threw junk into. And we had it sort of finished and discovered that it was kind of getting moldy and damp in there. So that all got ripped out and refinished. And so it's nice and clean, and there's it's all redone there. And kind of got to get all my video game stuff set back up over there. So let's see. So when we process the explosion, I mean, the only reason that it would matter that the explosion is not working correctly is if either the player is looking at the wrong thing for the collision and causing it to break, or this is collisions with the map. Or the player collision code is wrong. I'm not sure what would do this. Like, it shouldn't be checking explosions shouldn't be checking for player collision at all. And it seems to be mostly correct. Like if we restart here and hello. Oh. Emulator was paused. If we restart here for a second. I guess what I really want to see is beyond just the sprite updates happening. I want to see if I can shoot that correctly. Oh, that was weird. It didn't even, did that collide with the player? It's almost like it just hit the same horizontal line as the player. Come on. And then stopped. Or is it that the explosion finished cycling and then it stopped? Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay. If the explosion is done, we have to reset the sprite to nothing also, because what's happening is it's still drawing this, the sprite is still, I guess the sprite is still there in that position, but it's actually drawing it. Yeah, so what's happening is, because the sprite is set to a value, it is assuming that then the entity must have a value for the X and Y position that makes sense. And so it's drawing it there even though there's nothing left to do for that explosion. So what's happening is it's just kind of getting stuck there. I think that's what it was. That does make sense to me. So that should, in theory, fix the problem that we're seeing there. Come on. Well, it's still doing it. Let me just make sure that it reloaded it this time. It seems like, I don't know if that's my imagination or it didn't actually, or maybe I didn't really fix it, but I thought that Messin was better at reloading the ROM by just using Control T, but maybe that's just, maybe it's just not fixed, and I was too optimistic in my thinking that it would be fixed by that. Nope, it just didn't reload it. Cool. Alright, let me rewind and collide with the enemy ships. Make sure those explosions work correctly too. They should, because they're all the same. Excellent. So that is cool too. There's nothing wrong with flying through those explosions. Very good. And even the little guy up there is gone. Those are... I think those explosions are from like free game art or something like that. Alright, cool. So that proves out that the code is still working insofar as everything that used to work. Now we just have to fix the map and the way that it stores off the entity versus the sprite with the asset tool. One of the things I want to do with the asset tool is I really want to rewrite the way it handles the loading of the JSON data, because there's nothing wrong with the format here, or even the, where is that? Is that map1.json? Yeah. There's nothing wrong with this either. It you know, kind of puts together the data the way it needs to be. The issue is the code in here that loads the data way back towards the beginning of this. Excuse me. My soda water here not helping my diction. So the code that I have here for loading stuff from the JSON data is functional, but not great. And that mostly comes from the fact that the library that I'm using is meant to work in C only, and as much as I prefer to escape the treachery of C++, it is difficult to deal with. It's difficult to deal with object-based data when you are not working with code that understands how to deal with object-based data. Okay, you tell me this all the time, Carbonite, and you're never actually having a problem. So I'm just gonna ignore you for a moment. I appreciate the concern, though. So the nice thing about this is that once it loads the data, accessing it is pretty straightforward, but that means doing some C++ work, and restructuring all this code, which I don't know, do I want to tackle that tonight? I don't think I want to tackle that tonight, because realistically, all I need to do is add one more property right now. Like we have this thing here that says, okay, the sprite is a little bit, and we want to add the entity to match, which is also a little bit, and that would satisfy the criteria for what we're doing here. It doesn't make sense to rewrite the parsing code right now. or not even the parsing code, but just the, because we wouldn't be, we're still not going to be parsing it, but just the code that handles it. Doesn't make sense to do that probably right now. So let's avoid doing that for one more episode. The nice thing is we do have these properties here that control, you know, how many enemies we spawn, the delay between the enemy spawn, that's in frames, and then we have the sprite of, I believe that is the sprite of the enemy that we are launching. So that's the sprite. Let's add a new property and call it entity. And oops, I didn't read, so I chose the wrong kind of property. String. I'm gonna call that a little bit also. Oh, damn it. It would help if I didn't rush and instead actually paid attention. Cool. So that's that. We got to do that in the other one that's over here. Or no, that is the one that's over here that's selected. I hear somebody coming down the stairs. Okay. I'm going to assume that that's my wife. Okay. So, maybe she was messaging me to see if I checked to see if the laundry was dry. We'll find out. Alright, so those are the two things. Let's re-export this as map1.json. Let's save. Let's overwrite the old one. Let's go take a look at it and make sure that things look reasonable. Where are the objects? Is this not the right file? Maybe I was looking at the wrong file here. Yeah, I mean, the laundry is down here, so obviously that's the best. That there is some overlap, but it's just kind of on its little spin mode here, where it's in the non-wrinkle mode, where it can stay until we're done streaming for the evening. Okay, cool. So it added the sprites. So now what we need to do is we need to did I add that to this yet? No. All right. So let's do that. Okay, so we have now a place for the entity to be stored. So that gets loaded in, and then I assume somewhere down here we actually, do we do that here, or do we do that later? Okay, so what we do here is we do a mapping of, if we have an object on the map, we need to look for it in the sprites that are loaded and compare it, and if that comparison works, that we found a sprite, then we will map the ID of the sprite over to what it ended up being when we exported the content from the project file that is this guy, because now all the sprites are separate entities, so they're listed here in this file like this, so they get a different ID potentially as we shuffle things around, so that's why it has to do this mapping. Now for the entities, we probably want to do... Oh, we do. We have... Look at that, me thinking ahead. So we have a list of entities. Do we load those? I don't know. Let's see. So it doesn't look like it. So it looks like we just... Yeah, so this is where having the code with the other library would work better. Because all of these functions that I've used to kind of piece together these things are kind of a mess. But I don't have the library set up to do this right now. Alright, so what we'll do... I know this is relatively short for one of my programming streams, but I'm gonna let's call it an evening. Let's leave well enough alone, because it's been a while since I've done this. I've been streaming for about an hour, just a little bit over, and we actually accomplished a decent amount. We got some things working. We'll be back on Thursday, like our normal schedule. I'll have that library set up so that we can start ripping this apart. It's going to be a lot easier to work with, because it literally will just take this whole file and then treat it like a bunch of objects that we can interact with, which is going to make life a lot better. Exactly. Quit while I'm ahead. Because if I start doing this now, what we're going to run into is, you know, getting the packages for the library to install. Now that they're installed, are they going to link? Am I going to run into problems with that? You know, there's all these different logistical things where I can take care of that off stream. And once I know that things are compiling properly when we come back on Thursday, we can just focus on coding. So, as always, thank you for watching. If you want to reach me to ask me some questions or just to say hello, I'm on Twitter at Clairvis. I am on Video Game Sage as Zelius. I am at zelius@gmail.com. Come by, say hi, leave a comment in the comment section in the video below. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. If you are so inclined, there is a Patreon and a Buy Me a Coffee, which will be linked in the description below. I am not doing this for that purpose. There is also a link to pre-order the game, which gets you access to the source code, if you're so interested in that. And I will see you all on Thursday. Thanks for watching, and have a great evening. Take care.